for said people on the interwebs. So, welcome to HAX Camp. Wild applause was had. I don't even have to fake it this time. So, thank you so much to our sponsors, particularly Reclaim Hosting, Red Hat, and Duke. That other thing is associated with me, so I won't thank them. But thank you for making this year possible, and year as in like the first of many, because I plan on doing a bunch of these if they're useful to everyone. So just as a quick reminder, if you want to join our team, take the scavenger hunt. There is also a hackstheweb.org scavenger hunt that has slightly different criteria. We have 30 plus Hacks the Web jerseys to give away to people that complete our scavenger hunt, as well as the uber customized limited edition, I need it in bold text, limited edition HAX Camp one that's embroidered that is much like what I have. And now, a web components talk. 181 years in the making. Does anyone know why I picked 181? It's because Duke's 181 years old. So, HAX the Camp, right? You need a state of the whatever. And so, when you throw your own event, you get to pick the criteria by which everything happens at some level. So one of my goals of the 3 goals we had for this event is to give HAX-related projects a home. So if you don't know who I am, hey everybody, BTO Pro here. And today is gonna be loud and crazy as I introduce you to 4 different people. These are 4 amazing members of our team, and they're kind of crazy. So the first member is me, and I'm a totally normal human, I assure you. I'm loud, yelly, and friendly in that order. I dress a little bizarre, and I love my family and winning a national championship, which I have a ring for that I swear is not just something I throw out there to gloat. It actually is related. Now, this second member of our team is even better than the first. It's also BTO Pro, okay? BTO Pro, the developer, though. Screw that normal human BTO Pro. BTO Pro, the developer, graduated not once but twice from Penn State. I didn't give them enough money, but I get to contribute 100% of what I do to open source projects, which is what keeps me anchored there more than anything else. I've given away several million lines of code over 12 plus years to Drupal, PHP, web components-based ecosystems. So as a result of limited resources working in an arts college, I am a unicorn or full stack developer. So I also apparently hold my hand up with pen written on it. This third member, I think you're getting the trend here. Boom, also BTO Pro, okay? Because I'm apparently full of myself, but now it's full of myself 4x. So this one's the organizer. And BTO Pro, the organizer, likes to give talks and trainings around the country. It's been doing that for 12 years. I've organized multiple Drupal events in the past, helped organize this one. And I'm interested in organizing because of my master's thesis topic, which was studying the adoption of Drupal at a large land grant institution, wherever that would be, which was the catalyst for version 4.0, who's up here now, which is a developer activist. So I believe our institutions and world deserve better than what they're going to ever be given by industry in the current state of the web. I think the best way to fix the web and take it to the next level is to decentralize these powerful monocultures across the country that have more or less produced these solutions that are awesome, but require them to be in existence forever. So I think that I need to be embedded in education to develop technology that can shift us beyond the web of today to the web of where everyone is a contributor and doesn't need to be a technical expert. So I'm a little loud and crazy, but it's because I've found my purpose and I get to live it every day. And not a lot of people get to say that at like 26 when they realize that all of their effort gets to go towards changing big things and they just camp there. So if you're not familiar with a developer activist, let me explain it to you. So a developer activist believes that code can enact social change in effect. And so I write code not just to solve problems, not just to build websites, but to actually influence institutions. And so the input of today, as far as generating social impact, like what problem am I trying to solve that I'm so passionate about being an expert, being crazy and yelling, is I think that the complexities of modern web publishing have driven the majority of content to be produced by these things that are controlled by a handful of people. I'm not talking about the people in this room, but if you think of everyone that you know that just goes and tweets rapidly and uses Facebook and posts these diatribes, it's not because they want everybody to just see it. It's also because there was a very low barrier of entry to do those things. And so that content is always going to be kept in these spaces. WordPress, Drupal, all these things are great, but they require immense technical knowledge to set up and have content management systems, to have web development topics like this. And the market that surrounds these platforms that have coalesced so much information have literally no reason to ever generate a social media protocol. So have you ever thought it was weird? Like, email doesn't have an owner. Like, email wouldn't exist if it was created in the industries that exist today. HTTP in the same way, and HTML, right? These standards help ensure there's equal access and that fair markets emerge on top of them. But yet I guarantee there will only really be like 2 social media platforms that anyone knows about and flavors they're in. Most people just spin up a startup to try and get bought by Facebook now. So there is a protocol that attempts to decentralize this process. It's called Web Mentions. So I did want to give a shout out to it. But unless there's an easier process on top of the platforms that people use to create and self-express, it's never going to disrupt these Goliaths. So it's implemented in hobbyists, in like indie web type of space, if you've heard of that phrase. It's big in WordPress, but again, WordPress, I need to know how to set up all this stuff. I need to understand this demand. So I think it's a lot of why the old web is just in this infinite loop where forever it's like, well, how's the way I have to write my React app this year based on the new version that changed all these things because Facebook sets the direction. And Angular was the same way. To be perfectly honest, Polymer was that way for a while too. But unlike the rest of those libraries and frameworks, what was so unique to our team in finding Polymer is that they removed functionality every version. They're trying to get out of the way and have the web be the thing that delivers everything. So I think that the web needs a moonshot if we're ever going to grow beyond the vendors who popped up in the early 2000s and yet still dominate the space. And so that moonshot is intended to reduce complexity in publishing and the distribution of the world's knowledge. And I don't think that's possible unless there's fundamentally better authoring. And web components are the only way to do it. Bold statement, mic drop. Thanks, Tom, for not bringing it. So HAX is my moonshot to change publishing. And I don't have a record scratch here, but there's a record scratch, right? Because whenever you're in a great talk, it gets disrupted by a meme. And so welcome the HAX mascot, Snarky the engineer. We all know Snarky, right? Snarky needs to make sure they challenge that last point that you just threw out there. Hold the phone. Why does it have to be web components? Why can't we just use fill in the blank every JavaScript library that's ever existed since jQuery? Well, Snarky the engineer, you have another point? Oh, thank you for disrupting. Who even uses those things anyway, right? Web components, you mean that Google thing is what I heard for like 3 years. And then the narrative starts to shift a little bit and you go, that Microsoft thing, that Apple thing that just shipped in iTunes, so everyone that has an Apple product now uses web components. That Salesforce thing, that Comcast thing, that McDonald's thing, that ING Bank thing, that Red Hat thing, that BYU thing, that Penn State thing, that Sakai thing, yeah, that thing that's only used by like one company. Oh wait, it goes across a huge gamut of industries. So a talk I've been trying to share out more frequently is by Jan from Component Kitchen. He gave a sweet talk at Microsoft Research, boiling it down into like just 4 slides, is effectively that we as web builders have been creating houses like this. This is our divs and our gobbledygook. We're building houses because we need to live in something. It's not the best design, but it gets the job done. And it's definitely not repurposable. But in that house, in the construction of it, there's all these little pieces, right? There's windows and doors and doorknobs, railings. So if we fast forward to today with housing, right? If you look at the window in a modern house, it's insane, the level of complexity and sophistication, but yet it never breaks. And it's because it has specialists in factories that now crank out these very machine-driven windows. And as a result, we don't get more bland housing. We get much more vibrant, lower cost, easier to use, new design flexibility because those pieces don't ever break. And so that's where I view what web components really represent here. And once Edge goes to Chromium in early 2020 and Windows 7 dies in January, then you only need a polyfill to hit IE11 and you're gonna get full browser compatibility out of these things. So they also plug into basically everything that's out there. So if you go to custom-elements-everywhere.com, you can see automated testing, testbed scores against Angular, React, Preact, Svelte, all of them. So web components are a standard that work in all browsers, much like HTML code from 1995 still works, except maybe the blink tag. But that blink tag really does work. It's just developers have said, we're not gonna take that out, okay? That was a joke that Netscape engineers that were drinking one night said, let's make this stuff blink, that'd be awesome. So in 20XD6, HTML will still work. And because web components are HTML, they're still going to work. So this collapses this space. It creates this even playing field that we can all build on top of. And as another fun aside, I just realized this. If you type blink tag into Google, it actually has all these tags that are blinking, which is just wonderful. So now Snarky, the JS engineer, has been enlightened. So I'm satisfied, and I won't interrupt until separate minutes from now. So again, back to what that was. So HAX is my moonshot to change the publishing industry. So better framed, HAX was my moonshot. I yell in a lot of fields. I yell in academia, I yell in educational technology, I yell in technology communities, I yell in Drupal communities, apparently now yell in JavaScript communities. And in all of that yelling, eventually, over several years of just being alone on an island, my tribe found me. And many of them are here today. And I am incredibly honored that they are. So now HAX is our moonshot. HAX is our moonshot to shake up the web and say, I still don't know what HAX is, although you've got a cool logo. Okay, cool. So what it is we need a social media campaign and marketing associated with an approach, because otherwise an approach is never going to take off. And if we have a custom element that defines how to edit and how to edit better than anything else that's ever existed, and we can deploy it everywhere and it works across all platforms, then we will get a headless authoring experience, which is what HAX stands for. So HAX is headless, meaning it's platform agnostic. It's a client-side API-driven development methodology that basically says the backend doesn't matter as long as we can load all these assets. Here's this editor that works no matter what. So the moonshot goal of HAX is to create a platform-agnostic authoring experience that's second to none. Explain to people in your organization why they have 10 different Drupal sites that all have different editing experiences that they need to go to training for 5 different vendors in order to use. Replace Drupal with WordPress, replace that with whatever legacy architecture you have. That means nothing to your content entry and creation people at all, but yet it's a reality. It's because of the design decisions made by people in the team creating that web experience. So we want to plug into anything that saves HTML blobs of data. And then we can just drop HAX in and it'll work. So again, because everything I do is open source and everything our team does is open source, because it's really easy for universities to contribute to existing projects as opposed to start them themselves. So everything in the HAX ecosystem, everywhere it plugs in, is 100% free and always will be. And it's 100% built on web components. So HAX extends the HTML element. And there's an incredibly brief history as to what these words are, because we throw around a bunch of them in HAX land. So HAX was dreamed in a coffee shop in 2016. We sat around and we had 2 free days together at a Drupal camp. We're like, I'm just really bored. We need a better editing experience in our Drupal system, which is Elms Learning Network. And we just kind of dreamed up what that would be. And I threw out the word HAX as far as it just being a cool name and then ran with it. So Mike Potter showed it at DrupalCon in 2017 in Baltimore, which I had to go back and look up because I thought I actually presented that. But he is the first person that showed it to anyone. And what we were talking about back then was, what if we had these design assets that were self-aware and could let the surface an editing experience so the user could modify them? They were done as V0 spec elements. They were really clunky, but like a couple people there could see like, oh, that's a really provocative, interesting idea. And then we played a video of prototype Gutenberg at that time and said, because this is what you're going to have to attempt to sell your clients on as to why you need to sell them this crappy editing experience in Drupal. This is going to only get better. It's going to eat up more of the market share here. So fast forward to DrupalCon 18 in Nashville, Nikki and I did an hour-long talk about just HAX, in which I screamed a lot, and she tried to hold me back, and it didn't work very well. Sorry. But then fast forward to DrupalCon earlier this year, I briefly mentioned that we're working on our own content management system, and then Kendall did the what? So HAX to unpack these words, HAX is a multi-platform decoupled authoring experience. So it's a whole ton of web components. Those can work anywhere. HAX CMS is what I'm calling an organic static site generator. As in, imagine a file structure that is static, much like you've got your static site generating engines that require a lot of command line code, right? Imagine if people could do that on the front end. And then if I gave you those files, if you were logged in and there was a back end to edit them, the editing experience emerges. That's why Mike mentioned, like, has anyone done anything with a component that you drop on the page and it brokers all the login connectivity? So it's a content management system that you can just take a zip file and hand it to another person, drop it into their copy of HAX CMS and unpack and just start editing. So you can clone repos off of, you can actually go and import the HAX.camp site and start editing it on wherever you go just by pointing to the Git repo. It's also a zero config PWA and it's 100% offline capable. So I want to eliminate all of the garbage in this space. No one knows what the hell client side versus server side rendering is, all this light DOM, shadow DOM in the general population. They just want a website that expresses them, okay? They don't want to use WordPress. They want to use the easiest path of least resistance to get themselves projected on the web. And that happens to be WordPress or ClassicPress or what have you. So we're even getting into some bleeding edge abstractions of HAX CMS. 2019.HAX.camp is one example of this via HAX on Demand. But there's also Haxium, which Penn State is currently piloting internally, which is an enterprise integration version of SAS. Basically, you go to an address, it notices your university credential, it generates you a copy of HAX CMS automatically, and you start building. So we've got, what, Mike, like 6 courses running on that or so right now, mine being one of them, which is then an open course. All of these other projects are also completely open source. Now, the way HAX works at a super high level is it effectively takes your design assets, and if you surface a function that's HAX properties and provide the right schema, then whenever HAX boots up, right, HAX doesn't understand what it's about to edit. The elements themselves surface the definitions, and then HAX goes, oh, this is the way I should edit you. So that when you click on a video via Nikki's crazy video player tag, that you actually are leveraging the fact that someone wrote this little tiny abstraction of something called JSON schema, and then that builds the form dynamically. So we've got headless forms that make all of this possible. And so then the other parts of that, right, actually surface, well, can you scale this? Can you move it in the page? Does it have certain options locally? So that's how we went about building the HAX.camp website. I am dog fooding the entire platform. I will no longer do web development unless I use HAX CMS to do it, no matter how painful it's been at times to do that. And as a result, it's getting a lot easier to use and a lot clearer to understand what the heck we're talking about and the differences between HAX and HAX CMS. And so it's not just about HAX CMS though. So this is where the original use case came from. This is Elm's Learning Network, which is the actual place HAX came from. And so this is HAX loaded in. So we have a bunch of online courses that are now starting to be edited this way. But if you aren't coupled to anything, then you could drop that integration into Grav, because Grav is markdown based, and what end user is going to be able to scale up and know that? Or ClassicPress, a recent popular fork of to get away from Gutenberg. I wonder why I would be interested in that. And WordPress, and Backdrop, and Drupal 7, and Drupal 8, because we don't have a giant team anymore. We're focused on the front end of the application. That integration layer is nothing to us anymore. So web components effectively create a bridge between all of our code-based echo chambers we've ever had. How many of you have gone to a conference that's related to a CMS or something else, and it's like, let's talk about Drupal and Angular. I don't care about the Drupal part. I never have. I want the Angular part. No, I don't even want, how do I do a website with front-end development code effectively? It doesn't need to be siloed into Drupal, WordPress, Joomla, anything, any custom project. And so web components effectively form this bridge to all these other communities. This is a bridge community that we can form, whether those are front-end communities or whether they're legacy CMS, monoliths. And as part of that, if HAX aligns with web components, HAX also can be that bridge to other worlds. So if I really want HAX.camp to take off, I only need web components to take off. It's why I have all these social media things. I make funny stickers. I rant constantly about this. But it's because I really believe this can be a bridge to other communities. Other communities, you go and you have to adopt all of their conventions. This is the standard of the web. It is not going anywhere. It's not going away. And we can pull all the communities into one and let their use cases stand on other things than user experience. Oh, Snarky's back. Really on a good roll there, Snarky. Okay, all right. Look, I looked at web components already. So what's so 100 about spec work? Okay, so it's because you have to read past this. So it's a big deal for one that Firefox got on board with all the parts of the spec. That only happened in like October of last year. So about a year ago, people started even paying attention to this because it was no longer perceived as just a Google thing. So why I think they're a huge deal, why you should look beyond just the spec document, is a lot of people are shipping these things via NPM. So they're bundling these up. You can then download them and pull them into all your other local development workflows. Or you don't even need that, because I think this is where everything is going. So webcomponents.dev does full-on web component development in the browser, and then you click a button and it publishes it to NPM. It skips all of the tooling, all the build steps, everything. And now some people have gone to webcomponents.org. Kevin, I knew would bring it up like, oh, this stuff's kind of outdated, and it seems like you have the most recent blog post from like a year ago. And yeah, it sure does. And I rewrote all the docs on the site one day because they were wrong. Because this is largely abandoned. It's an index. It was made to get this off the ground, and Google has kind of moved on to other projects. There are discussions about revamping it and doing stuff with it, right? But it shouldn't be your hub to go to. What should be is this website. So open-wc.org is kind of this neutral zone. People still associate webcomponents.org a little bit too much with Google just because of the dominance of the Polymer elements that are on there. And so I would highly recommend going to openwc.org. Their tooling is way easier to get into building web components than our tooling that our team has made. So I'd totally look at that and jump in deep on that. So I also don't think it's in the spec necessarily. It's what happens as a result of the spec. So just because you build a single component, whoop-de-doo. It's when you reuse other people's components. It's when you reuse your own components. So like, I'll ramble about this. It seems like, oh yeah, we just use components for everything. And everybody's, no, you don't use components for everything. You use it for small pieces. And I said, yeah, I agreed with you 3 years ago when I was using it for small pieces. And then I just kept forcing myself to do it over and over again. And you eventually build up to these giant things when you reuse other people's stuff and realize that there's over 2,000 things out there. Now, that's varying quality. Not all of those are amazing, right? But a couple of them are. And some of the ones that really got us our foot in the door is I just went to a Drupal template on a single web page, and I put in one of these icons. And I remember that we were at a Drupal event, drinking obviously, and because it's Drupal. And so I was like, all right, I don't actually believe this is a real thing. Mike was trying to convince me of this for months to even look at this. He's like, this isn't a real thing. There's no way I could define new HTML tags. It doesn't make sense. So we put one icon on the website. We had to do all the other work of getting the polyfills in place, right? Getting that definition loaded. All the surrounding scaffold for a single stinking icon is really painful at first, but then it opens the floodgates. Because once you start to step up beyond just that icon, and you see like that and upload is one beautiful example. Every website I go to where I go to drag and drop something and it doesn't accept the file and it just says, oh, hey, I'll open that for you, I get really angry because VAD and upload is just go get VAD and upload. It's incredible. It works really well. It's just a droppable area. We plug it in all over the place in HAX. And it also feels like one of those things that it's like, why is the team making a platform decision based on if it has a component in it that lets me drag and drop a file? That's just a bizarre thing. Like, that's the way the web's supposed to work. I drag and drop a file, but it's not. It's a really complex process right now until you get that tag. And you bubble up even further and you say, well, iron list. Now, you can knock Polymer and having that dependency tree all you want, but iron list is incredible. I can load 10,000 elements on the screen at the same time because they're not there. So it creates an infinite virtual list based on feeding it a JSON blob. So it'll only print out into the DOM the things that are there. And you can actually inspect and scroll down and you see it cycling really fast. It'll only have maybe 10 elements at a time. But you can feed it like 10K elements. 0MD is one out in the community. Then you can just render Markdown, wrap it in a 0MD tag, and it'll render appropriately. And then you've got all the Google app and paper type of elements. So I mentioned we've been doing this for 3 years. 3 years of everything goes back out the door. Everything is about working towards this moment. And so I'm in love with web components way more than I ever was Drupal, because this solves my problems. I can actually stack my knowledge, stack and reuse other people's knowledge, and go way further than I ever could with any individual platform or framework. And so we have 171 elements up there. And that list keeps growing when we go to webcomponents.org. We actually have way more elements published at NPM that we don't even bother to list here. So if you can imagine that I have pages that have several hundred, like 400 or 500 different custom element definitions. I've got this mega Lego brick made out of other smaller Lego bricks, all working to their exact purpose and size. Because the fun thing with moonshots, as NASA found, is you can take these mundane things and really find a popular use case for them that solves a real hard problem. So duct tape, Velcro, those existed before the moon launch. But once the moon launch happened, these became this like, oh, snap meme. Yeah, okay, you send this multi-billion-dollar project up, but you still use duct tape because it's incredibly versatile. So I regexed our repo the other day because we have a mono repo for all our elements. We have 344 custom elements. 302 of those are Polymer-based, because that's where we started. And we're starting to get more and more into just vanilla HTML elements and lit elements, lit being the successor to Polymer. So let's look at some of what our team has been up to. So buckle up, because they get a little nuts. So Chuck made this awesome stop note. And you go like, stop right there, I don't care. It's just a silly little note. And say, okay, Snarky, go back in your cage. But this has this nice mesh of light DOM versus shadow DOM, right? There's a lot of stuff going on here stylistically that keeps this scoped. However, screen readers and other things will still correctly see these messages in place. And this was one of the first elements that Chuck made. It was for like just some random website, but that starts to become the point. Made it for a random course website, and now I can use it anywhere. So then Chuck goes further in his journey, and he's asked to make a self-check element. And this is a big deal for learning management platforms if you're in that space, or even just training space. Like I want to quiz the user real quick to make sure they understood what the last thing is. Hey, let's make sure that we use the right Angular plugin that plugs into this Drupal backend architecture to make sure that we can get it there in this poor usability pattern. It didn't make sense to me either. So I can click that, it's scoped, again, get the nice SEO, it actually bothers to read it, it's accessible, but then we're empowering our end users. They don't need to understand all this JavaScript that would just happen there for a simple click and reveal, and to do that accessibly. So, Tim, you're on point there. So then Chuck made person testimonial, and person testimonial I think starts to get a little bit closer to making people understand what I'm so pumped about. So person testimonial definition, right? This is just a little card you'd have on like a car dealership website or whatever, except in our case, Chuck made this for a faculty member to highlight faculty on a public front-facing website, right? Their office's website needed a way to say, here's the people that work with us and their experiences. So instead of making it specific to that website, it's a component now that we wire up to HAX via that little bit of schema. And now every website that has ever existed is able to leverage Chuck's efforts. No one goes, what's the responsive, Chuck, how do we make this responsive? I don't know how to do responsive design like the rest of my team. So I can now drag this in and it just happens. Now, granted, I'm tied to whatever the UX pattern involved in that is and those breakpoints, and we're working through some of that. But this stuff starts to boil up to the theme itself. So HAX CMS, you build web components to create themes for HAX CMS. You don't disrupt your pipeline and process at all. So Chuck is the first person to make a custom HAX CMS theme for their website. And it's made up entirely of other components, all these pieces that we can abstract and reuse across the web as a whole. Mike, I can't actually find any interesting examples that you've done anymore. So Mike used to do really interesting front-end work. He was way ahead of me. And then we had like a, hey, can you help me with this problem one day? And he realized that I knew more JavaScript. So, sorry, Mike. Mike made this figure label. And the reason I make that whole knock is Mike has been instrumental in all of our back-end ops work and workflow. So he really pioneered WC Factory, which is a thing that generates mono repos. So we were super inspired, and I had to point this out to him, and he was like, holy crap, we are on this journey. That this time last year, we sat down and said, all right, we got to build our tooling workflow, or else we're never gonna be able to make stuff as fast as we want. And so that was only a year ago, and a huge kudos to everyone here from Patternfly for sitting down with us on a call and talking us through how these things worked, because we were really inspired by your repo for Patternfly and its construction. But Mike gets into, like, I guess, you know, adorable little side projects now as opposed to anything visual. So this is a tag that he leaked out online a few weeks ago. It's something called containers on demand. So what he's doing is he has a component that sits on the page that invokes backend infrastructure, sets up a copy of HAX CMS inside of HAX CMS, and then puts it out to the user to use. So you can do rapid experimentation with this type of an approach, and it's not tied to anything that we're necessarily doing. So if you look at the API for that little thing, hit an endpoint, load up this Docker image. You run it on this port, make the button say start lab. We're going to collapse connotations of what any one system can do with this infrastructure. As long as we can get web components loaded there, we can build ridiculous crap with this. So if it's, hey, you want to submit a notebook, student? Sweet, we'll just spin up a container. It's got whatever the implication of a notebook is. We don't change the way that the integration points work at all. Or RStudio. Does anyone know what RStudio is? It's kind of a big deal if you've had an interface with it, right? But if you need to teach stats to stats students, you would tell them, okay, now go buy this. Hey, we talked about this lesson, go buy this application, run it locally, what have you. Or he puts it in here in a container, they click the button, they spin it up, they demonstrate technique, and they keep moving on. The entire problem is solved. And it's also solved in a way that if a faculty member says, you know what, I actually want to put that in my WordPress site. I want to put that in my existing Drupal site. I want to put that in my fill in the blank other thing. Maybe in the Sakai, because Sakai actually is starting to load web component-based definitions. This is where we get to, in higher education, what's called next generation digital learning environments, where we collapse the connotation of what any one system can do, and it's about the entire ecosystem. So as another crazy thing Mike has done, if you go to 2019.HAX.camp, this is invoking a Docker container, and it's just setting you up your own copy based on knowing what your name is from GitHub. So he's gonna do a talk on it tomorrow, I know, but Nikki. So what do I say good about Nikki? Because this is recorded and I don't want that to live on forever. She's gonna play it every day at work when I see her. But Nikki is really big on accessibility, design, quality, things that I should care about, but I'm not good at. But the first tag she made for us is obviously very memeable, but it's for a simple problem of playing a GIF, right? So you can throw an IMG tag and you can do whatever .gif, and now you've created an accessibility issue and you've opened yourself up to being sued. Because you should not be having motion graphics playing automatically on any website. Everyone wants to meme for all the lulz, right? So what you can do instead is now we can use an Ali GIF player, which operates very similar in API structure to a normal image tag, but it accepts an additional image as the placeholder, so that I have to actually click on the GIF button to make it play. Or collapses. Everyone loves hiding information on their website so their users have no idea where it is. But that snark aside, because that wasn't interrupted by the snarky JS dev, if I don't want to have to think about this anymore, that's kind of the way that we're approaching these problems. Nikki has this ridiculous knack for taking months, disappearing, just working on a single thing that I don't understand for the life of me, and then I can't live without whatever it is. So I don't have to think about how to do collapses accessible. I don't have to think about how to do tabs accessibly and have them have high SEO and be reusable. Nikki's gone through simple. We always laugh about simple, because anytime you see something that's prefixed with the word simple, you know it sure as hell is not simple underneath. Some of these simple projects are nestings of 20 to 50 web components, abstractions on themselves. But Nikki's got this awesome color library that we can now just drop in and use to get these accessible color ratios and CSS variables, shadow versus light DOM, accent colors. I can say, hey, video player, accent color yellow, and it will correctly do the contrast ratio between the text and the background. So I don't think about that concept anymore. Maybe it's a simple picker, because it's never as simple as a picker with Nikki. But if you want to actually illustrate the font in context, right? This will also do icons, do all kind of other things because of the schema that she's feeding into these things. And this element that I don't even think she's going to bring up here, which should be deemed revolutionary, even though it's just wrapping a whole ton of other elements, but this is called simple fields. Simple fields can read in HAX schema abstraction and generate a headless form on the fly. And it generates it based on definitions that point to other web components. So it's building a form of other web components. So let's say we don't have a date picker, or we don't like our date picker anymore. We no longer update any of our schematic definitions. because this schema would say input method date picker, not the web component that generates a date picker. So then we go back in and we fix whatever is in this abstraction to say, this is the way to present a date. And now we get this nice date picker. Hell, it could even be the native one, because the native one's actually pretty good now. And then this one, which if you've gone to hackstheweb.org, this is the centerpiece in my mind. So this is video player. This was what, Nikki, probably 8 months of work. I always say the phrase 8 months of work, so it's accepted like, oh yeah, I did a lot of work on that. So this is a lot of engineering to make an incredibly complex thing really simple for us to implement because of all the problems that it ended up generating that we had to solve. Like this is a moonshot in itself. I mentioned the simple colors thing. Simple colors became a tangent that came out of this so that we solve this color ratio issue for good. So if you go to the hackstheweb.org website and you click play on my dumb face, so I made sure to take a really dumb screenshot of it, it's gonna load up the transcript from YouTube, and then you can click and jump to the points in the video. You can search the transcript live. There are companies that sell education places, that as a service, doing that search. And then I replace them. The other thing, and I think Nikki is gonna talk about at some point, is editable table. Now, I don't do a ton with tables, but to anyone that has done anything with tables, this is a huge leap forward as far as being able to work with the web in an efficient way. So she's got a static standalone demo that just runs on a site. You can dump in existing HTML tables and it'll import them and make them editable. Make your changes and then you're able to export them. So that just then sits in, like DOM, wrapped in the editable table tag. If that definition comes along, now it's editable for the user. And then we get up into my craziness, which is usually around HAX and HAX CMS itself. So every aspect of this interface is a component. The drawer is an app drawer in this case, but I'm really interested in these types of things, why I threw up MobX. So this is a button named Site Menu Button, and it says type previous. So if I give this to Chuck, because the theme Chuck has built is fantastic, but I'm not gonna be able to teach Chuck all the nuances of MobX and how we get tied into the state if he's really supposed to be focusing on front-end design, right? He wants to style the button from a comp. He doesn't want to need to learn all of these things and intricacies of this one specific platform just to do that design work. This tag semantically encapsulates all of the state and then exposes CSS variables that Chuck can hit to know when he puts it in a template, he's gonna get the previous button. He's gonna get the next button. And it's not just Site Menu Button. Site Get Corner leverages the Get Corner tag, unpeeling the onion up from just a little octocat so that it ties into state management automatically. And if the end user has selected, hey, I want this to be exposed, then it's gonna show the correct link no matter where they go. Or a breadcrumb trail, or the active page title, right? All the way down into the body of content, like this is searching Wikipedia based on an input query. It's a huge deal for someone that just wants a one-off reference, like on the website where I put unconference. Hey, I want to find just a working definition of unconference. So then I just search that in the editor and it's there. And Luke did a good job of pointing out, like making fun of apps that boil up to a single tag. Well, that's what HAX CMS does. So there though, you can see that is the learn-to-theme. So it is an element of its own creation that is the theme. So the theme layer is abstracted from the state management. So we can just have the user click a button and switch the theme out, and it's switching out a web component definition. Leveraging all the lifecycle hooks, detach the current one, okay, throw that away. Attach the new one, drop the HAX tag into it. All of those little pieces have their own scope and purpose. And so then when you inspect the DOM, and this is, we could get into progressive enhancement at a later point in time, but if that tag isn't gonna load because of and you can actually go and view source on HAX.camp, and you'll see this weird way that I have this working, but it's figuring out the polyfill and the version to ship on the client side, even backwards compatible to like Netscape 1. And yes, I tested it on a lot of really old things back in that era as well. So straight up, I know we can transform the web. I'm seeing it happen all around us. I've built champions before and not given up. So this moment is really important to me, and I wear my goofy ring when I'm having one of those moments where I feel that, because I played for this team for 5 years and watched us lose right at the finish line. And instead of giving up, I led them to a championship the next year. See, I related it in. There's something with all these hockey jerseys and building a team. So I will put this to you all now. We're building our championship team. Please join us and unite efforts and fix user experience and authoring experience forever. because we can be a bridge between our communities. We don't need to live in these silos anymore. We don't need to have a pattern fly conference and a HAX conference, even if there's like a name on it, and a Sakai conference in this sphere, right? If we're all solving these fundamental issues of user experience, the way things get styled and scoped, and we solve them with web components, we can actually build a bridge to all these different building communities and create elements everyone can use. And I'm not saying we're all going to use identical elements, right? But we can have these conversations. So let's build some amazing bridges this week and all the way to 20XD6. It's a Homestar Runner reference, in case you don't know. So thank you for being here, seriously.